first event of the presentations is initial coin offerings, what's all the fuss? Initial coin offerings are an interesting topic, and it's something that's created quite a lot of media buzz, as has cryptocurrency and bitcoins, etc. What's it all about? Well, a lot of people don't understand it. It's all online, and there are risks associated as well as potential benefits. What we're not saying here is whether people should or shouldn't invest in a Bitcoin, or should or shouldn't participate in an ICO. It's about making sure that anyone who's thinking of doing it goes in with their eyes open and knows what the risks are and how to protect themselves, so they avoid the ones that don't come to fruition or the ones that are, quite frankly, scams. So, I'm Claire Whitelegg, and I'm from the Isle of Man Financial Services Authority. We're going to be joined by one of my colleagues, Dan Johnson, from the authority as well. Dan works in our policy team, and he's been working hard on looking at this particular topic. And then, and this is really exciting, we're going to be joined by 4 students from Ballacomine High School who have worked with the authority, along with 2 of their colleagues, to actually prepare some information for consumers. So we'll also be referring today to the leaflet here, which is ICOs and cryptocurrency, what's all the fuss about? And this is very simple, clear information that these students have prepared, and I think, you know, we're all very grateful for the work that they've done on it, but you'll meet them later. Right, so IOSCO, the International Organisation of Securities Commissions, who's organised World Investor Week, has some very clear messages about initial coin offerings. A smart investor, and we all want to be a smart investor, understands the risks that are associated with an initial coin offerings and crypto assets in general, and is careful in deciding whether to invest. i.e., a smart investor only invests in something that they really do understand, and they understand the risks, and it's a risk that they can actually accept and tolerate. Secondly, a smart investor does not forget about the importance of due diligence when considering investments in online and digital environments. There used to be an old saying, if it's in print, you believe it. If it's online, you believe it. We've all heard about fake news. Well, yes, there is such a thing as fake ICOs and fake websites. So if you want to get involved, there's some very good ones out there. If you want to get involved, make sure that they're actually real. Make sure that they're not a scam. A smart investor recognises the red flag warning signs of online investment fraud. I think that goes without saying. A smart investor never invests based solely on celebrity endorsement. Now, I've got a 17-year-old daughter, and if Zoella says something's great, she thinks it's great. So if Zoella said invest in this, she probably would. Does Zoella know anything about it? Probably not. This is what we're talking about. It's making sure that people actually are a little bit cynical, maybe, when they're listening to somebody talking about investment. We all know celebrities are great at being celebrities. That doesn't mean that they're very good at investing or appraising investment opportunities. And they're probably being paid to do it as well. Finally, a smart investor knows that most legitimate firms do not allow their customers to use credit cards to make investments. Why is that? Well, if you're using a credit card, normally that means you're attracting interest. So why would you invest money that you don't have in something speculatively and then have to pay additional money for it? Also, if you are a fraudster, if you get somebody's credit card details, it's quite easy to then access further monies as well. So normally, investment firms and legitimate firms don't ask for credit cards. They might ask for debit card information, but they won't ask for credit cards. Right, so I'm just going to hand over now to Dan, and he's going to take you through actually what is an initial coin offering and what's it all about. Thank you, Dan.
Hey, good morning. As Claire says, my name's Dan Johnson. I work the Policy and Authorisations Division in the Authority. So, what is an ICO? At its core, it's nothing more than a means of raising money for a business or for a project. Initial coin offerings are often defined as either ICOs or token offerings. There's derivations on those names, but ICO is by far the most common. The process is a lot like a business launching on, say, the stock market. An initial public offering. Basically, you pay your money to the company and you receive something for that. In the case of an initial public offering, that's shares. In the case of an ICO, you receive a digital token. But broadly, that's where the similarity ends. See, with shares come certain rights. You have certain rights to the profits of the company. You have rights to a share of of the equity of that business. And if you have enough shares, you have a right to control that company. Digital tokens generally offer no such rights. Some do, and one of the important things if you are considering participating in an ICO is understanding what rights that token affords you, because by default there are none. Those rights are not common across all ICOs. Some will offer you rights to use the product at a discount or even for free, but many will actually offer you nothing. And the idea is that you will sell that token hopefully to somebody else in the future, but there's no link between that token and what you've invested your money in. What's particularly important to underscore is that ICOs are not financial services, and specifically they're not by themselves investments. The law on the Isle of Man, and indeed in most countries, is very clear on what an investment is and what it isn't. So buying fine wine or paintings or classic cars aren't investments, and they shouldn't be, unless my wife's asking. But there's certain controls around buying investments and selling shares when they've been launched on the stock market, and they are there to protect consumers. So, why are we concerned? So, as I've said, there's no rules around an ICO. So when a business wants to sell its shares to the public, they're bound by conduct rules, they're bound by prospectus rules, mis-selling rules, disclosure rules, and all those rules are there to protect you as consumers. There's no restriction on what an ICO can say or do on any of its advertising information, its prospectuses, its website. It can promise you the earth, and there's really no real controls over what they have to tell you and what they can and can't promise you. Tokens, as I mentioned earlier, don't actually have any kind of inherent value. So, as I said before, the shares will give you, if nothing else, a right to a proportion of the company, to the equity of the company. Tokens don't give you any of that. In fact, many ICOs will actively market themselves on their ability to raise funds quickly and without having to jump through all the regulatory hoops and go through all that red tape. And that's what they push themselves on, without mentioning that red tape is actually there to protect you. So, does that mean there's no regulations around ICOs? In a word, yeah, there aren't. There are some controls. Certain pieces of legislation still apply to them. Trading standards will apply to them as they apply to everything, including wine and classic cars. Generally speaking, financial regulations are very similar across the world. As Claire touched on before, there is international bodies which set what financial regulations and what controls around investments should and shouldn't be. So across the world, 80-90% of the rules and regulations are broadly similar, and that's to apply consistency. And every jurisdiction has its own cultural and its own sort of nuances on that, but broadly they're the same. At the moment, there's no consensus on how ICOs should be treated as yet. It is being actively worked on. The island, as a signatory to IOSCO, is participating and inputting into the development of this framework. But as it stands as of today, there's no real consistency. So some jurisdictions like China and South Korea have just outright banned them. Other jurisdictions like the US take a very hard line and consider most ICOs to be investments unless you can prove they're not. So On the island, we moved quite early and we imposed our anti-money laundering and terrorist financing rules on those people who are involved in cryptocurrency generally, which includes ICOs. We also required that registration and our inspection powers were applied to those businesses as well. Now that's not regulation. That's purely applying the money laundering and terrorist financing rules, and it applies our inspection powers. So the benefit of that has meant we generally know who they are. We are further ahead of most jurisdictions in that respect, including the UK. The UK has no such regulations at the moment. And it does mean that when the international standard setters apply their framework, we're at least in a position to be able to enact it very quickly.